Welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. As I start today's session and a new week, and therefore a new theme, I thought perhaps I should, recognizing that I did not cover a session yesterday, being Monday, I thought perhaps it would be important for me to provide a preface to what will be a new theme, a new session for the week. As I thought through what I would like to share, something came to mind. Something that I thought perhaps was a useful uh, way to start this week and today's session, which I must say will be a short one. Forgive me as I get myself set up. But as I thought through, or as I shut down notifications so I'm not distracted, as I as I thought through and thought about what I'd like to share, something came to mind. It's called the Prayer of Serenity. The Prayer of Serenity. It effectively simply says, Lord, give me the serenity to accept things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I'm going to be speaking to men, and I'm going to be speaking to women in this week. I'll go between genders, and in many ways, the advice works for both parties with some subtle inversions. The one thing we lack mostly, the younger we are as men, is good judgment, serenity, a serene mind. Um, the one thing we also lack is understanding. Part of the reason we lack understanding is that we do not study. You see, understanding comes from study. And if you study and you seek and search for information, you increase your understanding. That understanding creates faith. The faith is therefore based on knowledge, built on understanding, and hopefully wisdom. There are things that we can change. There are things that we cannot change. There are things we can control. There are things we cannot control. 2 sessions ago, I provided an analogy using a Venn diagram, and I said, life is supposed to be simple. We choose to make it complicated. And if you have two circles, one representing things that matter, and the second representing things that can be controlled by the person, and you bring both together, you have an intersection, and in the middle of that intersection would be things that matter and things that you can control. If you focus on those areas of life, you will have profound success. Success leaves behind clues. Success is not a mystery. Designed into every creation by the Creator is success. But there are laws, there are principles, there are rules that are embedded in the success equation. Doesn't matter whether you're white or black, male or female, boy or girl. Doesn't mean if you're able-bodied or perhaps less able. If you apply the success formulas on a balance of probabilities, you will be successful. It's not a mystery. You don't have to wish for it. You don't have to hope. You just simply have to act by faith. Most young men make mistakes. One of the reasons we make mistakes is because we lack that understanding. One of the reasons why the understanding is absent is because there are no good men around providing advice, sharing their lived experience, providing warnings, examples that the young men can either choose to follow or at least have the option to accept or reject. As a result, most young men, we tend to learn, the younger we are, from our peer group. The only problem is our peer group are not too dissimilar in experience from ourselves. And it becomes very necessary for a young man to seek wiser counsel. If you go back to the days of antiquities, depending on whether you were pre the Roman Empire and the Roman period, there was a place where people came to on a daily basis. The place was designated for conversations. The young and the old, the wise and the not so wise gathered around, and people just sat there, sometimes for most of the day. Someone will bring up a conversation or a topic of conversation, and others will opine, share their experience. And what it was supposed to be was perhaps the first example of crowdsourcing your decisions. There was something called believability weighted, associated to people. So, for example, if you were a successful man and you'd achieved a lot of wealth, and you'd done so with integrity, and you'd done so in the right manner, if you stood up and answered a question about money and wealth and prosperity, the believability index assigned to you will be much higher than someone who perhaps was a cobbler and who had no money and who was always asking the goldsmith to lend him some money. You had an index assigned in people's minds about who do we believe. On the other hand, if you were talking about a topic that had to do with religion, the priest, someone who was taught, or clergy person, vicar, someone who was in that discipline, would have a higher believability index than someone perhaps who was an atheist. There were people who were philosophers, and in every area of life, it was possible, if you were seeking knowledge and if you were open to learning, to find answers or ideas that could lead you towards the answer you wanted. Truth is like the center of town, and this conversation started over the weekend as I spoke with my loved one, my brother, and I said, truth is like the center of town. And we were just about to go out, and I used the analogy. I said, if I asked you to take me downtown, you can lead me down different pathways to get to the same destination, but there are several pathways. Some will be quicker, some will be more pleasurable, maybe less pollution, noise. Some will be less pollution in terms of air quality. Perhaps some will be restricted by the means of transportation, whether we are walking, taking a taxi, driving a motorbike, cycling, using skateboards. But there are several ways to get to that same center of town. The question we always have to start with is, why do we want to get to the center of town? And is it urgent? So I use the analogy that for younger men, understand that time is your most important commodity. You exchange your time for everything you want, but you only get 24 hours every day, and you do not know how many days you get. Whilst there is no urgency to get to success, and therefore while there is a recommendation to make sure you're well cooked, it's also necessary not to waste time. One of the reasons why time is wasted is because we do not treat time as an asset, as a valuable asset that we have. You see, with time, I can exchange my time for anything I want by paying the right price and making the right sacrifices. Over time, I might gain what I want as a goal, or I might fail, or I might be somewhere in between. In any case, one of the ways that we can self-sabotage our success are the decisions we make in time. And those decisions either take us backwards in a direction opposite to where we should be heading towards, or sometimes they take us in that direction. So sometimes decisions are headwinds or tailwinds. They push you forward, they help you propel you towards your goal, or they restrict you and make it harder for you to get to your goal. In the past few months, I have been talking about relationships, because relationships and the decisions we make in relationships or prior to relationships either sabotage our future or support our vision and goal. As a young man, the success formula has always been the same. As a matter of fact, in the West, and this formula came out from the United States, young men were told, irrespective of your socioeconomic level, where you were born, or the family you were born into, there were three things you could simply do to guarantee that you were at least within the average, and certainly not below average. And if you did so, what you found was that the possibility of actually being above the average was high. Finish college and complete college. Do not start a family prior to marriage. In other words, do not have kids out of wedlock. And wait until the right time before you start that process. Those three recommendations have always worked, irrespective of where you are in the world and who you are, irrespective of whether you are a boy or a girl, male, female, lady, gentleman, it doesn't really matter. Finish college. The purpose of that is if you can learn how to read and write and learn the art of delayed gratification, then you understand how to make good decisions. And it means you have some sense of discipline and you have a vision. You can't have delayed gratification without the ability to see. We see with our eyes. When we do so, we call it sight. When we see with our imagination, we call it insight. We're creating a future. You cannot have delayed gratification except you can dream or see, create in your mind. And then discipline yourself to play the part or play the role required for you to get to that goal. So success is definitely fundamentally based on your ability to read and write. The more you can read properly, the more you can express yourself or interpret what you see and the opportunities around you. The more you can delay gratification, the more likely you will be successful. That's the first part. Most people in the West should not have this as a problem. We've solved the issue of our reproduction, survival and safety in the West. So you're not worried about cold, you're not worried about freezing as a result of lack of shelter. You are not worried about being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or the wild beasts. You're not worried about your neighbor smacking your head with a rock and therefore staying vigilant and not having any sleep. We have solved the main issues in the West. And so that allows most people to self-actualize or to actually pursue self-actualization, recognizing that love and belonging and self-esteem are the next steps. Once you've survived and you have no issue about survival. Part of the reason young men are failing, and even young women are failing, is that we haven't been told that the decisions you make are the ones that will self-sabotage your success. I'm going to deal with one today as an introduction and as a brief introduction, and then in the sessions that follow this week, I will try to expand on other matters. I'll use myself as, I guess, an anecdotal experience, something I try not to do regularly. As part of my recommendations to young men and women, I often say, do not get married until age 35 for men. For women, do not get married in the West until age 27. The clarification is in the West. The purpose of that is most of the survival safety needs have been outsourced. And therefore a woman and the typical gender roles that we played, the responsibilities that came with such roles. So back in the day we had our roles and our responsibilities were defined by reasons. Those reasons were fundamentally survival and safety. The man went out and brought home the bacon, the lady protected, preserved and nurtured. Women have been emancipated, women are free, and they are thriving on that success. It then means that it's important for you to become something of yourself. We make a mistake of saying a woman's value and a woman's purpose is to reproduce. Well, it makes her no different from the wild beasts. But there is something unique and different about human beings. Woman is definitely not the same as a wild beast, despite similarities in, for example, the ability to reproduce. Whilst intricate into what she could be as a woman, it's not her purpose. Your purpose is your reason for being born. It's a magnificent gift you were given. It's not just to reproduce. There are people who fulfill their purpose and do not have kids or do not have children. Family is an important unit and a source, therefore, derivative of happiness for women based on their biological makeup. A man who does not reproduce is not useless. A man who does not reproduce can still fulfill a purpose. Your purpose is the reason why you were born. And my recommendation and the reasons for saying delay is so that you can discover who you are. Pursue something, make something of yourself, develop an identity beyond just being called a mother or a father. So for young women or for young men, waiting until 27 gives a woman the opportunity to discover herself, 10,000 hours of practice, develop competence in something, become a professional. I don't like using the word independent, but it helps her to be independent of what society puts as a limiting factor on herself, on her possibilities. Become a doctor, become a psychologist, a psychiatrist, an accountant, but go out and show that you can do something. Now, outside the West, you can start family early because the need for two parties to work together is much higher than in the West. For men, we say wait until 35, go through your period of failure, develop a masculine frame, understand your manhood, develop your value as a man before you take on the responsibility of being a father and a husband. They're very simple recommendations. Now, prior to when I was 30, I followed the formula, which is partly why I can share the formula. Prior to when I got to 35, I followed the formula. Without exception, I have found that most men who are slow to pull that trigger of family at a younger age tend to have more success. Certainly tend to be more complete, tend to be more mature. Most importantly, tend to have actually achieved or pursued what they consider their purpose to be. So there's a sense of fulfillment and containment with men who wait and who do at the right time. The same thing applies to women. What I will be talking about in the sessions to follow are a number of important points. One, I don't care what you think about sex as a man. Just make sure you wear a rubber. Do not reproduce until it is time. Do not reproduce until you are ready. Do not reproduce with the wrong person. Male or female, wait. Very important statement. If you do not wait, and if you commit the error, and you reproduce too early, you sacrifice on the altar of your future all of your potential, most of your purpose, most of your success. You make the journey much harder. So wait. One way, and I'm never going to say you should abstain from sex. In this sexualized world we have, it's impossible for young men and for young women. I would simply say protection. Protection is important in whatever form you want. Now, I will hold women as slightly more responsible because we have close to 23 forms and even increasing of birth control. So the idea that a woman in the 21st century in the West is reproducing without the foundation that should be built before a family begins, despite having all these methods of birth control, is almost unforgivable, because by doing so you bring into the world a child that is less likely to be successful, but more likely, if a woman, to be raped, more likely to be abused, more likely to become a sex worker, more likely to be promiscuous, more likely to become pregnant before the right age, and if it's a boy, more likely to be a dropout, be a gang member, participate in domestic violence, more likely to do poorer in school, college, and the list goes on. The reason for that is you're raising a child in a family without two parents who love each other and set the right boundaries. So, as I bring today's session to a close, robbers for men, other forms of birth control for women. Enjoy yourself, have fun, but be wise. Don't be foolish. I'll go back to what I started today's session with, the serenity to accept things that you cannot change. Unfortunately, when it's too late, you have to accept it. The courage to change the things that you can. The courage is not even needed to buy some form of birth control. It's just common sense and the wisdom to know the difference. So, whilst you go out there and you enjoy yourself as a young man and as a young woman, understand that the choices you make have costs, they come with consequences, and they apply constraints over your future. You are never making and seeking a solution. You're always seeking and making a trade-off. The trade-off is, do I sacrifice my potential in the future and my success for the immediate gratification of 10, 15, 20 minutes, and perhaps if you're a stud, 30 minutes of pleasure, sexual pleasure? It's not either or. There are safeguards that have been implemented to ensure that you do not make the mistake. But if you make the mistake, that there are safeguards. To neglect the safeguards, to neglect the wisdom of the ages, to neglect the opportunities available by virtue of technology, and to make the mistakes simply means that you have no one else to blame but yourself. I have talked about single mothers and I've talked about single fathers in previous videos. And most people who have listened to what I've shared will understand and see that I don't hold back. Not because I don't think you're not good people. I don't hold back simply because it's not about you. I am speaking through you, trying to reach the younger ones who possibly I can stop them from making the mistakes that you and I have made. Now, I'll stop today's session right here. And in the session I begin tomorrow, we'll talk about a topic that I think is an interesting one. And I hope you join me.